Once you have a sequence, you're ready to start editing some clips into it. And there are so many ways of doing this. Essentially, they're all achieving the same thing. You're going to locate a clip in time and space on the timeline. Here I've got a sequence open. It's called First Sequence. It's in my bin here in the project panel called Sequences. And I'm ready for some media. I'm going to look at some stuff and I'm going to put it on the timeline. I'm talking about time and space. By time, I mean from left to right in the timeline panel. When is it going to be? And in space, I mean which track is it going to go on? I can choose whether my video is going to go on to any of the video tracks I have. And in many cases, it's really just a question of dragging and dropping and you're done. So let's have a look at some of the ways we can do this. First of all, I'm opening up one of my bins here and I'm going to pick a shot to put in. Let's have this mid shot. Now, if I double click on this, I can view the contents of it. And I can see right away that this clip has no audio because the little audio icon underneath the monitor is gray. I can't do anything with it. And also on the timeline, I've got source track buttons here telling me which tracks are available. I've got video but no audio. So this is just video only. And there's a quick way of applying content to a sequence. You can just drag and drop straight from the bin. Now I'm getting a warning here which is telling me this clip does not match the sequence's settings. Change sequence to match clip settings, ? What this is telling me is that the way my sequence is configured is such that for this video clip to play back, Premiere Pro is going to have to do some work. It's going to have to convert the video to match my sequence settings. Do I want to change the sequence or do I want to keep it as it is? Now, if you're mixing and matching media, you'll just have to make your own decision about this. Maybe you've chosen correctly in the first place, maybe you haven't. I'm going to say yes, change the settings, and now I know that my sequence is going to play this back perfectly as it is. Let me just zoom out a little bit as well on this navigator. In this case, I've dragged my video onto the video 1 track. I could just as easily drag it onto video 2 or onto video 3, and the higher the video track, the more in front it is. So, of course, I'm just repeating the same clip again and again. If I zoom out a little bit more, drag over a bit, and find some media that has audio. Let's take this double identity stuff, for example. Again, I can drag and drop, and when I do, Premiere Pro is going to aim to put the audio for the clip in line and connected to the video and on a track with the same number. So here I've got video 1 and audio 1. If I put this up on video 2, it goes on to audio 2, video 3, audio 3, and so on. If I just resize the timeline a bit, you'll see that above the tracks and below them, there's this unmarked grey area, which looks useless but isn't. If I want to add a clip to a track that doesn't exist yet, or if I try to add audio that has a different format to the tracks that I have, I've got to have mono, stereo, or 5.1 and so on audio tracks. If I try to put something on the timeline that's not supported by the existing tracks, I can just drag it to this unmarked area and Premiere Pro will automatically add the tracks I need. So here, if I drag this up to video 4, there is no video 4 yet, but if I let go, Premiere Pro is automatically going to add those tracks for me. I've now got a 4th video track and a 4th audio track. This is lovely because as you're staggering your way through Premiere Pro, first getting to know it, it means you don't need to think quite as much. You can be pretty confident that Premiere Pro is going to allow you to do what you want to do. And there's an even bigger way of doing the same thing. A moment ago, I put a clip into the timeline, and because the sequence settings didn't match, Premiere Pro offered to change the settings. Let's get this glove compartment shot. If I look at this, there you go, it's somebody searching a glove compartment. If I drag this shot onto the new item button, and this is where you would go to make a new sequence. If I bring this up, you get the regular new sequence dialog box and you can choose your own presets and so on. But that's the manual way. But if I drag this button directly onto the new sequence button, suddenly I get a sequence containing that clip and it will automatically match the settings for the clip. So here is my new sequence. I'll call this matched sequence so you can look at this. And I'll drag that into my sequences bin, just to be tidy. This means if you aren't too confident about video formats and resolutions and pixel aspect ratios and compression and file types and audio tracks and all of that kind of stuff, if you really just want to get started and get editing with Premiere Pro, this is a perfectly legitimate way to create a new sequence. It's probably how I would do it. There are a couple of exceptional circumstances where you're going to want the manual control to define your sequence settings, but this way you know is going to work. So you just drag and drop. In fact, if I want to, I can drag and drop a whole bunch of clips. Let's just select, shift select some more, just holding down the shift key and clicking on the last item on the list, drag that onto the new item button. There you go. I've now got a sequence with all of those clips in it, and it matches the settings for that media. Let's call this one matching multiple clips. Okay. And now here's the thing. I want to see my sequences bin, but I can't see it because the window's too tall and I don't want to resize the interface. So if I press the tilde key, it's the one on your keyboard with a kind of a backwards apostrophe on it. Now where it is varies. On mine it's in the top left. If I press this key with the mouse over this panel, it's going to go full screen temporarily. And I'll just grab this and put it in the sequences bin and then press the button again to go back out of full screen. It's a very useful shortcut. You can use it on all of the panels in the interface in Premiere Pro. Now I can drag and drop multiple clips into the timeline. And if I'm in thumbnail view, for example, if I hold down the control key and bring up this double identity bin, I can select a whole bunch of clips. I can choose to put them in different orders. I can move them around and I can throw those into the timeline as well. Let's just put these in here. That works too. And I can also select a bunch of clips in my project panel, and having selected them, click on this button down here, Automate to Sequence. Now, I won't go into all of the controls here. Most of them will make sense to you as you look down. You've got the order that they're going to be put into the timeline. That's going to be either the order you clicked on them or the order they happen to be sorted. Do I want them sequentially, or if I've put markers on the timeline, they can go where the markers are. You can hit the beat and the music that way. Just add markers and then choose this option. Do I want to overlay on top of anything that's in the timeline already, or do I want to insert and push things out of the way? Do I want to have some overlap? How many frames of overlap do I want? And if we're working in NTSC, we're 30 frames a second, so this would be 1 second. If we're working in PAL, then it'd be 25. Of course, you can do lots of different frame rates these days, but those are the standards. I can do frames or seconds. I can automatically have a default video and audio transition, which is a cross dissolve for video and an audio crossfade for audio, just to blend everything together. This is great for montages. And I can choose not to have the video and audio, but in this case, I'm going to say OK, and there are my clips all lined up. Or in fact, I've probably got the playhead in the wrong place. Look, you see, it's just gone over the top of what was there. Let me position the playhead here and have another go, and there you go. Now, what I did just now is I accidentally left this playhead right at the beginning of the timeline, and as a consequence, I just laid those clips on top of the ones that were already there. In this case, not very visible because it's the same shots. But this is a hazard. This is a danger when you're editing, that you could accidentally replace content and not know you've done it. So go steady and observe what you're doing and make sure that the outcomes are what you expect. As well as taking things straight from the bin, I can also open them up in the source panel up here, and I can drag and drop from the source panel. I can take just the video from the source panel, or just the audio from the source panel, or I can use these two buttons. Now, in a nutshell, there are two ways that you can edit in Premiere Pro. You can either edit like film, where you're chopping things and separating them and inserting new clips or removing them and closing the gap. That would be like film style editing, or if you like word processing with text rather than an old style typewriter on paper. Or you've got, let's call it the videotape style, where if you want to replace something, you just record over the top of it. In one case, things move around. In the other case, they don't. And these would be called, if you like, the insert mode or the overwrite mode for editing. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to put this shot down on the timeline, and I'm going to zoom in a bit with the plus key at the top of my keyboard. Plus and minus keys will zoom in and out. And I'll just move this over a bit, and I'm going to hold down the shift key to snap to the beginning of the clip on the timeline. This is the shift key on my keyboard. Now I'm going to open up this draw search shot, and I can mark this with an in mark and an out mark to say the beginning and the end of the part that I want. And now look what happens if I choose these two different modes. First of all, look what happens when I overwrite. So I'm just going to lay this on top. there you go. If I move my playhead out of the way a little bit, you can see this draw search shot has just laid over the top of the closing shot. Now visually, it's sometimes hard to spot because the name of the clip will always be moved to wherever the beginning of it is. So it still looks like we're looking at the left end of this closing shot, but we're not. If I undo with Control-Z or Command-Z, just watch the length of this clip. You see it's extended now back to where it was before. Overwrite, writes over the top. I'm just going to undo. Now have a look what happens when I use the insert option instead. And in particular, look at where the end of this clip is on the timeline. When I insert, it pushes this clip out of the way. We would say further down the timeline or later in the timeline. I'll just undo so you can see that again. Insert, it pushes it out of the way. Now essentially these two modes for operating like film where everything moves around or operating like videotape where it doesn't, these two modes apply to all of the things you can do on the timeline. Putting things in the timeline, moving them around, and taking things out. You've got those two modes of operation. There's no right or wrong, and you'll commonly find that towards the beginning of the edit you're using the insert mode, and towards the end of the edit you're using the overwrite mode to avoid changing the synchronization of things happening on the timeline, to avoid changing the length of your timeline. There are keyboard shortcuts for all of these things, of course. It's the comma for insert and the full stop for overwrite. And that's adding clips to a sequence in Premiere Pro CS6.